Welcome to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. In each episode, we'll take the complex world of tax, all the jargon, acronyms, and stuff that make your eyes glaze over, and explain it in an impactful way to understand the complex and unknown areas. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Now, here's the host of Essential Tax Podcast, Mishkin Santa.
Good day, everybody. I have a fantastic guest on the show today. Today's podcast kicks off the start of the series of podcasts that I'll be doing to kind of kick off the next tax season. Some people call it the 2025 tax season. I always refer to it as the tax season that we're doing, the 2024 tax return or the current tax return. But we're going to kind of zoom back a little bit from tax today, and we're going to talk about some things that I think are really impactful in the tax world that don't specifically relate to tax, but secondarily, I think that they're very, very important. I think this is an issue that I deal with every single day when I'm talking to my clients and my staff, or issues, I should say plural, because we're going to talk about a lot of different things. But before we get into all of that, let's introduce our guest today, Randy Johnston. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and your certifications?
Yeah, Mishkin, pleased to join you today and for all your listeners. I am out of Hutchinson, Kansas, have started multiple businesses through the years, have been around technology for 50 plus years at this point, on the Accounting Today list for 21 years at this point. So have produced a lot of professional training for CPAs for a long time. And the rule of thumb is if it's technology related and accountants use it, whether they're in public practice or industry, I try to stay up to speed on it. So yeah, I have this weird twist of technical background and broad product knowledge. And so I'm also kind of practical, though. I'm from Kansas. KS stands for keep it simple. So based on the way you want to work here with the audience today, I'll try not to talk over anybody's head. I can get techie, gritty, dirty with the worst of them. But, we're going to have just some good fun today talking about these topics, and some are quite serious.
Absolutely. And I'm well aware of the Kansas. My wife went to Kansas University, so I'm very well aware of what you're talking about there. So if you haven't guessed it, folks, today's show is the intersection of technology with tax. That's what we're really going to get into. We're going to talk about cybersecurity. We're very big on that at the Wolf Group. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence. We're talking about digital assets. And, putting all the cards on the table, I just want to say our firm has used Randy as a consultant previously. So he has, given us the good stuff. And then Randy and I recently were presenting. I was presenting on tax topics. Randy was presenting on technology topics. Recently at the CCH conference in Las Vegas this past October. And I ran into Randy and I kind of wrangled him. I said, "You're going to be on my podcast." So that's how we got here today. But again, let's just get right into it, and let's get into our first big topic, which is cybersecurity. And the funny thing is, Randy, I probably talk to 10 to 12 people a day, as far as like prospective clients, current clients. And there always has to be some information that I have to look at because we deal with very complicated tax issues. And still to this day, I would say about 70% of them, even though I tell them, you got to upload it through a secure link, they just kind of email it over to me as an attachment and walk me through kind of the current landscape of cybersecurity issues when it comes to being, we're going to look at it from the point of view of a tax preparer or CPA firm. Walk me through kind of what are the big issues, and then also talk to me about why are tax firms such big targets of cybersecurity criminals?
Yeah, so lots of different worms in that can of worms to open up here, Mishkin, but I completely understand if you're dealing with high net wealth individuals, or for that matter, even any tax client, you're a prime target because the information on tax return is everything you need for identity theft. A lot of times you'll have social security numbers, addresses, bank routing and transit numbers. You've got pretty much everything. So, I guess we'd call it a target rich environment. And you are absolutely also right that so many of our clients simply want to do the easy thing, send it via email, instead of using any sort of secure methodology. You are right. I do work in a lot of CPA firms, have been in one this week, actually. Same problem at that firm. The clients just say, no, I'm just going to send it to you via email. Well, that is just so unsafe on so many fronts. Pretty much what you've got to do when you're using email is think about it like sending a postcard. Would you, put your most confidential information on a postcard? If you're sending it through physical mail, wouldn't you at least put your confidential information in an envelope? And if it's really important, wouldn't you send it via courier or a special service like FedEx or something like that, so you knew it was delivered? Because email is just best efforts delivery, and it's public. And as soon as you realize, oh, everything that I'm sending can be seen, that should be the showstopper that says, no, I'm not doing that.
I see. Okay. And so if you were consulting with the staff, and let's call it the CPA firm that you just talked to, and they're like, they come at you and they say, oh, well, Randy, I know this client, known this client for 25 years. If they email me an attachment, that I've asked them for, that we've clearly had correspondence on, what's the harm? What's the harm of me just clicking on that attachment, opening it up, and then being efficient and not having to make my client go back and jump through a bunch of hoops? What can be the worst possible scenario there?
Well, and I do hate making clients jump through hoops because so much of the technology is difficult to use. And, a pretty good rule of thumb is the more secure things are, the harder they are to use today. I wish it wasn't that way. It is improving. But the worst case scenario could be quite bad because bad actors intercept this traffic, email traffic, on a regular basis. And in the last 24 hours, I was dealing with a firm whose traffic clearly had been intercepted. And my estimate is they had about $250,000 of fraud committed with their clients. That was less than a 24 hours ago conversation.
Wow.
Now, what could happen here? Let's just say it's a PDF document or it's an Excel sheet or a Word document. A bad actor can actually put a link inside that document when they intercept it. So in effect, they can say, oh, yeah, here's an interesting document. So I'll just put a link inside this document. And when it arrives at the firm, when the person who's expecting the document opens up this Word document or Excel spreadsheet or PDF document, it will plant malware code inside your firm, which in effect gives the bad actors access to everything inside your security. Because when we talk about security, you got to think about it like onions. There's layers of the onions, and I want you to have 3 or 4 layers. But email links or documents attached to email are still among the most common. They're in the top 5 ways of breaking into firms. And as artificial intelligence is making these malwares more obtrusive, better, the email messages being sent being better, we're going to have a lot more of these type of attacks. And even though you might have been expecting an email from a client, I have seen scenarios and have proven those scenarios where we were expecting a message, but a bad actor intercepted the message, wrote an alternate message in the tone of the client, and sent it to the CPA firm.
Wow.
And you wouldn't think those type of things can happen, but technically they're pretty bloody easy. And these bad actors are well funded, they're patient, they got time on their hands. So, you were asking for the worst case scenario, but I haven't laid it out all the way because this link could be one that encrypts your network, encrypts your cloud hosted provider, disables your ability to work for a long period of time. Most of these attacks, when they're really severe, you can be out of service for 3 days to 2 weeks, something like that. So it sounds innocuous, but it could be pretty ugly. Now, realistically, are most of the messages going to arrive safely? Sure. But it's in the client's best interest if you can get them in the habit of using a portal to gather documents, PBC, prepared by client, or client request documents. It's always safer to do it that way. And it's always safer to deliver returns electronically if you can do it as well. So you can get e-signatures if it's personal or business and you need those. The habit of a portal is a wise habit. Now, as we go forward, Michigan, we'll convert from all this ugly user ID, password, what is it? I can't remember it stuff, to a more passwordless environment. Technically,
Okay.
that's known as a FIDO2,
Oh, wow.
FIDO, Fast Identity Online, a FIDO2 environment. And we're very close to that. It is working, has been working for about 14 months, but a lot of firms have not implemented it yet. So it's got to get a little more adoption. But if you're an iPhone user today, you've had that for 18 months. And you may use it for a few things, but you're maybe not thinking about it all the time.
I see. Okay. So we talked about FIDO2. You kind of answered my next question, but let me just flip the scenario here. So I'm a client, right? I'm an individual person. And I'll use myself as an example. I have a mesh network. I've got, a network for my family. I've got my network for my kids because my kids love to get onto, they like to play games and stuff. And then I've got a network for guests. I work from home, all that stuff. Is that good enough to have that kind of setup? Do I need to do, personally, do I need to have better hardware? Also, when I'm interacting with a CPA firm or a tax firm, are there software things that I should be thinking about? Like, for example, if the Wolf Group emails me, let's just say that I email the client, and our fee schedule, which is a PDF attachment. Should I push back and say, "Hey, Mish, I'm not opening that up. Send that to me through a secure link." What's the reverse? If I'm sitting at home and I'm a home user, what should I be thinking about?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to try to keep this simpler. This has improved, by the way, over the recent year or so. In your home mesh network, of course, I would want you to run the latest technology called Wi-Fi 7. And many of us have bought access points in the last few years, 6 or 6Es. They're not as secure nor as fast as the Wi-Fi 7s. And the Wi-Fi 7 mesh access points are only a couple $100 a piece, and you can use them outdoors too. I mean,
Oh, wow.
it's very inexpensive, and they run at 46 gigabits. So they'll overrun any internet access that you can have in your home. But I'm going to twist this just a little bit on you because your listeners can look up the transaction where Walmart bought Vizio TVs in the last week or so. And amazingly to me, Walmart said, we bought the Vizio TV company because we wanted to see what people were watching. What happens is television sets can throw off information that can be used to track you. So in your homes and in your businesses, we always recommend that you segment your network, private and public. I actually, in CPA firms, like to use private, semi-private, and public. And I put my cell phone connections on semi-private in those scenarios. But if you've got two, that's better. But this segmentation is a big deal. So in the old days on Wi-Fi, I said, never ever use a client Wi-Fi, never use a public Wi-Fi like at Starbucks or, a pizza place, or never use those. But nowadays with the WPA3 is the encryption standard that's used there. It's relatively safe with a VPN, can be relatively safe. Now, the core question you ask, in your home, we still want you to run firewalls. Your provider, whoever it is, Comcast or Spectrum or whatever, those providers often will tell you that their connections are safe. Never have I found one that is safe. So you actually need hardware or software firewalls in your homes to protect. Now, in my home, I actually have a commercial grade firewall because I'm doing so much client work, but most people won't spend for a commercial grade firewall. Mine's $2,500 for the firewall. Most people just won't do that. Okay. But you can get relatively easy to install firewalls like the Unified Dream Machine is a product that I like to recommend because it's simple to set up. It runs mesh like you're used to and so forth, but it'll protect your home network. And so my rule of thumb is I always want firewall protections in my home and in your firm. Even if you're running completely in the cloud, I always want all the firewall protection there because all of those desktops and laptops you use need protection, number one, and they need to be segmented, number two.
That's great. And Randy, will you do our listeners a favor and maybe send over some links that I can post to the show notes on some of the stuff you just talked about?
Absolutely happy to do that. I knew as we talked about things, there'd be just things that come up because I want to answer your questions and your listeners' questions along the way, and I do track all this stuff and answer emails on a regular basis. In fact, I spoke in Nashville this week, and somebody who had never seen me before said, could I follow up with you? And another person who was standing there says, he will always answer your email. I send him an email or two throughout the year, and he always is back with me. And,
Yeah.
it's kind of nice to have an attendee tell another attendee, this guy always does what he says he does.
Yeah, no, that's actually my experience too. Anytime I send Randy a note, he's very quick to respond back and overly communicative. I think that's fantastic. Just one last question related to the home thing, because I've thought about this a couple times. At the Wolf Group, we have a cybersecurity written policy that we make our people sign. Yep. Should I have that for my home? Like if I have a guest come over, should I have them sign off? I had, not to out the family that came over, but we had a family of 7 that came to visit with us about 2 years ago from Australia. They had a lot of young kids from the ages of, I think, 13 or 14 to 17 or 18. And they all got in our Wi-Fi. I remember the TV was not working. I'm like, why is the TV not working? And they were all on the Wi-Fi and all sorts of stuff were going on. And eventually the dad, who's a good friend of mine, he looked at me, he's like, okay, I'll make sure they get off of there, whatever they're doing on there. But is there like a written policy that I should have for my guests that are coming to use my network, or things they can't get onto or shouldn't get onto?
Well, so here I'm going to take a little bit of a different twist, because we could be more onerous and restrictive, but I don't think we have to be in that situation. If you've been on commercial networks, occasionally you'll see on wireless, are you going to accept our policies? If you stay in a hotel and have ever used theirs, you see their policies and so forth. But if you follow the advice of a separate guest network and a private network, even in your home, Mishkin, what I'd like to see is devices. So all your TVs, all your Alexa units or Google Homes or whatever you're using that might be a speaker device, those things should be on a separate network. That's why I actually usually recommend 3, because I want those to be isolated. Then I want your family to be in a network. And by the way, often I will break up the networks even more than 3, because your spouse may work for a different company. And I typically like to isolate the spouses from each other, because they each have a business they're responsible to. And then I usually have the kids, if you will, on a separate segment. So if you think about it, I've just gone from 2, private and guest, to, husband, wife, the couple, the children, the guests, the devices. So I just took you to 5. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
But it's not that hard to set up these segments like that. But the amount of security increase you get is high. So your guests from Australia, I'd have just kept them on the guest network.
And that would have been, you would put like a bubble around them at that point in time.
That's in effect what you're doing. And they're almost like somebody on the outside, and that's okay. And, in our home, we used to have, when our children were smaller, we used to have big LAN parties, because, in those days, I was actually helping create things like the Xbox. So I got a prototype Xbox, and, we were doing PC gaming, but I had big projectors. So when we had LAN parties, we'd have, big projectors and multiple computers and fastest internet in town. We were lucky. I guess the kids were lucky on that, but I always had them on a separate network. And so I never had to worry about the security of my business privacy or my wife's business privacy, because they were on a separate network. So now, if you were one network, I probably would have a discussion about it, because, and let's just take something kind of awful, porn surfing. Okay. If they're into that porn surfing is associated with your IP address. So now Mishkin becomes the porn surfer.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
I don't think you'd really want that.
No.
And by the way, we have exactly the same problem with the AI engines, because the artificial intelligence engines watch your IP address. So if you're making a query, that query is associated with your IP address, whether it's your home or your business. So if you're querying things just like you would in a search engine, it's going to have that in your history, and there is no way to protect that. You might talk about cookies and private browsers and all that stuff. No, all of that's pretty much, well, the technology companies like Apple and Google and Microsoft, they have all that stuff. And
We
they're
got it
going to
all
have
on.
they're going to have even more of it. It's part of the reason in Microsoft Outlook, for example, the new generation client, which I'm not a big fan of compared to the old generation client, it allows Microsoft to keep more of your private information. And I'm not a fan. We may not have a choice, but that's kind of where we're at right now. And there's been some beautiful articles written by technical people explaining those issues. And they're right. And I'm just saying, okay, what are we going to do about it? Because who are you going to call if you're using Microsoft for email?
Right. No, completely understood. All right, let's move on. I want to talk about remote staff, because in the post-COVID world, more and more, and at the Wolf Group, we're almost 100% remote. What do you and I get this all the time, because people talk to me about, Mish, I'm going to move to, I'm an employee of this company, but I'm moving to Italy. And I'm like, well, you talk to there's tax issues there that I'm like, hey, if you move to Italy and you're the CFO of the company, maybe you've got a PE issue. But my point to them is, have you talked to the company? Do they approve that? Will your computer work when you get there? What do we think about remote work? We define remote work as, your place, your home office, right? That's where your remote work can be conducted. It's not like you can just take your computer to, you have to ask permission if you're going to take your computer to, say, a conference, or you're going to go work at a Starbucks or whatever it is. So talk to me about remote work. Talk to me about people that, I don't think people put a lot of thought into remote work and just kind of taking their computer willy-nilly wherever they go to.
Yeah, and there's actually kind of two levels to your question in my mind, technically, because I recommend that businesses geo-isolate their technologies. In other words, I try to restrict things, let's say, to the United States, or maybe to United States and Canada.
Okay.
And, so if you're going from one state to another, that's a little bit less of an issue than, let's say, you're going to Croatia, or, as you said, Italy. Because as soon as you cross the international borders, the protections of our networks are worse. And
Okay.
even if you're trying to run security with VPN, because I was dealing with somebody from the Philippines this week, there's going to be some slowdowns related to that. Worse, if for some reason your remote computer that you're carrying around with you gets infected, now that infection can pass through the VPN. So you don't really get very good protections that way. So and there are some locales where communication speeds are particularly slow, and you would think that's not really going to be a problem. Yeah, if you get, the further you get away from your cloud computing resource, the slower the performance can become. I know when I try to run, let's say, auditors in Africa, I have to do things differently. So, any employee that's running remote, we have greater security risks. Number one, we have a culture maintenance issue, as I would see it. And we also have a performance issue.
Okay. So let's get a little deeper into that. Talk to me about airport Wi-Fi, hotel Wi-Fi, privacy screens if you're working on it. I see it all the time. I do a lot of travel, and I see these executives popping up their computer, and I'm like, I can clearly see your screen and what you're working on. And I try not to look. I'm like, I'm just going to watch my movie here, but it's in a dark plane. It's like, yeah, you're like a Christmas tree over there. Talk to me about all that stuff. And I was talking to, I was at a donor dinner last night, and this lady was telling me, she goes, I'm going to Germany for the first time in like 20 years. And I was like, well, be real careful about, using the hotel Wi-Fi and the airport Wi-Fi, and taking your USB plug and plugging it into the airport, jacks. And oh, I didn't know any of that. And talk to me about that a little bit, about why we got to be careful with that.
Yeah. So Mishkin, I'm laughing as you say that, because I flew home last night sitting next to a person with a privacy screen, and I'm looking at everything on the screen, and I'm trying not to comment to her because she thinks she's got everything private. And, I'm looking at it saying, yeah, if what you're doing is not very private. And as another collateral story, I have actually sat 3 or 4 rows back and watched people log into their bank account and oh yeah, and then got off the plane and logged into their bank account to prove to myself I'd actually seen what I saw. And yeah, I logged into their bank account. Now, I'm a good actor. There's bad actors out there. All right. Now, you know, the bottom line, I'm still a little old school on this, and I think old school is safer. My rule of thumb is I don't recommend and allow the use of public Wi-Fi's. They're safer today than they were. They're still not completely safe. Frankly, even using your smartphone as an access point, which is a very common trick that many people do, is not as safe as I like. So my portable computer actually has a SIM card built in, and I have a subscription, so I don't even use smartphone to my computer to get access. I just use the computer because I have a cell card inside the computer.
Very nice. Like that.
That is far more secure. It's way more convenient. A lot of people have iPads that have cellular subscriptions. It's the same concept. So my rule of thumb is I never use a client network. I never use a hotel wireless. I never use, you know, a Starbucks or whatever wireless, but that's because I'm equipped with the technology, so I don't have to even pull out my phone. I can just open up my computer or can open up my iPad and I get it. Now the problem is for many, they don't have all that. If it's an occasional travel, like the example of going to Germany, well, now you've got a much dicier problem because first, they're not used to traveling. My best advice in those cases is to actually use the internet cafes. They're very common across Europe, for example. Is there still risk there? Absolutely. But at least that risk is not going to be put on your own computer or your own iPad. And could your email get read? Absolutely. You know, if you're logging in trying to do email in an internet cafe, you're going to have some of those issues. And if you think about just trying to do productive work where your applications are loaded on your machine, the internet cafe thing is not going to work out very well, except you can go to one of those internet cafes, pay for the access, and they're going to be a little more properly set up in general. So again, that sounds pretty onerous. Now, if you're in high-end properties or higher end properties, which again are common, but not quite as common for the big brands we're used to here in the United States, the Marriotts, the Hiltons, and so forth. You know, those internet access networks today are safer globally. So if you had to, you could kind of do it, but just recognize that most of my technical friends who do cybersecurity have a computer that they travel with that they only use for travel. And when they get home, they wipe it and restore it.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
wow, that's super thought right there.
Yeah. And, you know, they're right. But unfortunately, most of our listeners here don't have the skills to wipe a computer and reset it up. That's not their deal. But, you know, technically, that would be the safest. Almost like what's the worst case on an attachment? Well, the worst case if you're traveling is your computer is infected and you don't know it.
Right. And going back to our earlier discussion, you know, when you talk about opening up that PDF attachment, that malware link or whatever it is, sometimes you don't even know until much later on. You know, those things can be in there for a long time. And then it's like 6 months later, it's like, well, who, you know, then you're like, oh my goodness, I remember I clicked on that 6 months ago and, you know, now it's coming back to bite us. So
yeah, and that's absolutely the strategy now. Remember, as I said earlier, these people are patient.
yes.
So they can infect you and wait. And it's the same with the identity theft. You know, I'm going so far now as to say every identity in the United States has been stolen and it lives on the dark web. And the bad actors are simply waiting for quantum computing to enable breaking into all these files that they've already harvested. And if they have to wait 4 or 5 years, not the end of the world. So it's part of the reason for why we like regular maintenance, like changing passwords on a regular basis. But again, many of our clients just don't do that. And frankly, many of our firms, we don't do it because it's too inconvenient.
So talk to me about that real quick, about the ID theft stuff. Is there a service you recommend? I get this. My credit cards always say, hey, we can give you ID theft protection for whatever, $3.99, $5.99, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or we did a check and your name is on the dark web. What do I? Is that like? Should I do something about that? Should I go get their protection? Is it worth the $5, or do you think something else?
It may be worth the $5 because of the insurance that they have. Is it going to really protect you more? No, but it's nice to be notified, I think, but there's not a lot that you can actually do to remediate it. Some of them, LifeLock, for example, will claim that they can actually go through and remediate, and they do some actions, but I just don't think many of us can do enough to fully regain our identities at this point. Now, that's a sad state of affairs, but it is what it is. So, on that light, though, until we get fully passwordless, we're still going to recommend password management systems, the likes of Keeper or 1Password or Bitwarden being 3 that I would recommend. And unfortunately, some that I've recommended in the past, like LastPass, have been compromised that I just don't trust the company anymore. Or there's others that I've used historically that just haven't kept up with the times, like RoboForms. But, bottom line on this one, if you pick any of the password managers today, it's better than no password manager. So, there's 30 of them out there. I would just like everybody to be using a password manager and generating very long, complex passwords so they're not trying to remember in the head or type in something that's simple.
Okay. Let's move on. Let's get back to tax for a second. What are your thoughts on, I call them DIY tax software companies?
Yeah.
But there's a whole, I remember when this came out, maybe it was a year or two ago, but they got in trouble for sharing PII, personal identifiable information, with Meta, Google. So it's kind of like you did, I remember in my 20s, I did probably used H&R Block to do all my tax returns. I remember actually being at the IRS and they're asking me like, what do you know about doing taxes? And I was like, I don't know. I use H&R Block. It does it for me. But talk to me about that issue, about the DIY softwares and that sharing of the information with those types of sites and the issues that are bubbling up there.
Yeah, Mishkin, your question is insightful and important here, because when you look at the retail preparers, the H&Rs, the Liberties, all of those types of businesses, the preparers themselves, I think, have good heart and are trying to do the right thing. The upstream companies, though, have made deals on the back end to share the information. And Intuit is in the same place with TurboTax. In fact, I frequently teach about licensing of software. And, in the coming year, I'll be reporting even more on sub-processors, as they're called. There are other software companies that do some of the work for the company that we use. So Yodlee for payments, for example, has a very unfriendly, I'm going to share your data license agreement, just like Intuit does. Okay. So here's the big deal. I will talk about this with you, I think, in artificial intelligence too, but this PII information, this personally identifiable information, I just don't put that in the AI engines, and I don't like it going into the personal tax prep software products either, because most have an unacceptable level of sharing. So if your listeners are conscientious about their identity, they've got to recognize that many of these personal products pretty much wholesale share the information. So, as an example, and this has got a little age on it, but in 2023, I had 3 different CPA firms contact me about physician clients whose compensation had been disclosed, and the physicians were hot because the people that were contacting them knew the amount of their compensation, their social security number, their children's names, their addresses. They had it all.
Wow.
And it was leaked by preparation.
Wow.
Okay.
That's scary, and also I'd lose it. My my head would explode if they had all that info.
Well, the three CPA firm contacts had, and their clients had. And I think that's actually proper. See, here in the United States, we do not have a very good position on privacy. At this point, 7 states have enacted privacy laws. There's 19 that are already on the books. And we are far behind the world. We're behind Canada, we're behind the European Union on privacy issues. And I think with the change in administrations, we're not going to have any privacy acts or any AI acts of consequence brought into play. In fact, it was kind of interesting, the new evolution of a crypto overnight. There's just things like that that are just going to happen. Now, again, I'm not, trying to be pro or con on anything. It's just, here's what the climate's going to be. And I happen to be a fan of privacy of information. I do business in the US and Canada. I have to comply with the Canadian privacy laws, and there are provincial privacy laws as well. That'd be the equivalent of our states. So PIPEDA, for example, is different in Alberta than it is in Ontario or, British Columbia. And I have to be aware of it and comply with it. And I'm actually very happy about that. So
Yeah.
the Canadians do so much better on this issue than we do in the United States. In fact, I guess I'll say we're kind of flippant about it. And I'm not being ageist on this, but the person that is most likely to give up all their personal information are males below the age of 25. And the second most likely to give up all their personal information are females below age 25. And in the male's case, it's so we can play a game. Okay. In the female's case, it's typically we want to socialize. And so again, I'm not being ageist on that. I just know that under certain conditions, people will give up their info. And no, I'm not giving up my info. And again, I'm not trying to be old school on this. It's just that I know that if you've got my social security number, an ACH, and with today's AI, if you've got 7 seconds of voice, hi, this is Randy. I'm away from my phone right now. If you leave me a message, I'll call you back as soon as I can. Bam. You can fake a voice for a wire transfer. So I no longer permit my clients to do verbal confirmations of wire transfers because that can be spoofed too.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is that at my children's school, some of the parents were trying to push, let's all sign a pact as the parents that the kids won't have access to, the iPads and the cell phones until they're in 6th grade or 7th grade or whatever. Not that I'm against that, but in my head, I'm like, well, what about if we just taught them like real life practice? I don't know about you, but when I was in school, I'm always like, why don't they teach us how to change oil in a car or, things that I really need to know in real life? Like, why don't we have, I guess some schools maybe had shop class, but, in my head, I'm like, well, why don't we just teach them the rules and make them, good users of these things and make them understand why there's danger zones. And, it's kind of like hiding things and just saying like, oh, we will just push it and kick the can on it and not deal with it. I think there should be a lot more education, especially at a younger age, given the stats you just threw out.
Yeah, it's almost mandatory in my mind that you can't prevent access. Now, we could go into all the brain science of why it actually changes the way children's brains work if you give them smartphones or tablets. That's not today's conversation, but there's enough science behind that. I'm quite confident in that claim. But why not just teach people to be safe? Because I think, Mishkin, you're young enough and old enough. You remember when calculators were first introduced, and people would say, oh, you won't know how to do calculators. And now we all have a calculator in our phone with us all the time, because the old claim was you won't have a calculator everywhere you go. You need to learn to do math in your head. Right. Well, okay, maybe not. So, but being safe on these devices is a pretty big deal. And I would rather have more education around safety on it. as opposed to like the recently passed laws in Australia, banning a lot of these products at 16 and below for social media.
Yes, I heard about that. Yeah.
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 And so, I watch that, and I do understand, both my wife was an elementary education person, 9 different specialties. I mean, she's really stunning to watch teach small children. And I'm education background too. So I understand the pedagogy behind not having these devices quite as much around. In other words, not having them in the classrooms because they're not always used properly. When they are, they can be educational levers. When they're not, they're kind of babysitters. But, I had babysitter technology when I was in school with films, right? Okay, we're going to show a film this afternoon. Okay, sure we are, right? So, again, we could go down that rabbit hole a little bit further, but education on security for our team members, our family members, and those around us, that's pretty doggone important at all levels. And we've become kind of lackadaisical about that.
Right. Okay, let's move on. If we're talking about cybersecurity as King Kong, then maybe artificial intelligence is Godzilla. So let's talk about AI for a second here. What are your thoughts about AI being used by tax professionals? And I'll give a quick example of the way I use it. So when I do a lot of consulting work, that's really where my bread and butter. That's where I shine. I try not to do a whole lot of compliance these days. I always tell people that that's probably the wrong use of my time, just because I'm not in it as much. I think if you're doing prep and review, you really got to eat it every single day and do it every single day and whatnot. But when I'm doing consulting, like I know where to find the answers. I know where to do the research at. I know the regs, the IRC, all that stuff. I will go in and I will check to see what ChatGPT says on the same question. And it's shocking to me, like 7 times out of 10, it's wrong. And I'm like, where's it pulling that from? Why, I don't understand why it's the complete opposite of the actual real life answer, or, and I think people told me, well, sometimes if it doesn't have an answer, it has a hallucination where it makes up an answer, things like that. Talk to me about, that ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, whatever else is out there. How's AI going to be impacting the tax industry, and what should we think about it right now and in the future?
All right. So you are correct on the making stuff up out of whole cloth hallucinations. That happens with almost all of the large language model artificial intelligence tools. Now, in rapid succession, though, there are tools that can be used by tax professionals that are restricted and more correct. So Tax GPT, BlueJ, CPA Pilot, and the more recent introductions of Checkpoint Edge with the co-counsel in it, and Wolters Kluwer's Answer Connect with AI in it. So there's 5 research tools that all have AI-powered technology behind them. Further, there are tax prep tools that I've worked with now for a couple of years, like Blackboard Tax Autopilot, that will fully prepare a 1040 partner reviewable with no outsourced labor and no 1040 work paper tools like SurePrep, CCH Scan, and AutoFlow, or Gruntworks. As an example. Yeah, wow. It's stunning, Mishkin, how good it is, and it can handle very complex returns. Lots of Schedule C and K1 and Schedule F and so on. I mean, I didn't believe it when the guys first said, here's what we're doing and here's how it works. And I said, yeah, I don't buy it. Yeah. And then they showed me, and I've got about 25 clients on the platform today, and consistently they're telling me it's way better than any of the other methodologies they've done. And they're getting about a 5-fold improvement on their costs when it comes to 1040. And the same thing is going to happen with business returns, I figure. So are AI tools going to come along? Yeah. Now, the general tools, which is the other question you asked. First, I'm going to rank these in safety order. And then I'm going to suggest what might be better used for most firms, because those are 2 different answers as I see it. Yeah. And I want to protect client information, just like we had all this privacy conversation earlier. First, if you're looking for the safest of the tools today, Perplexity.ai, Anthropic's Claude, Microsoft's Copilot, then ChatGPT. But if you're using ChatGPT, you can't be on the $20 version. You need to be on the $30 enterprise version.
Okay.
Then a distant and unacceptable product, Gemini,
Okay.
and Meta's Llama. And it gets even weirder to me because Meta's Llama got approved by the Department of Defense and is being used by Palantir and other people like that. And it's like,
Why?
who made that decision? Because those are very unsafe platforms. Now,
I see.
as it turns out, I have gone through the effort to data poison ChatGPT with state tax law to see if I could fool it. So not only did we have a hallucination, but I actually asked it where it got a right answer, and then I gave it some feedback and said, no, this is correct. And then in the future, including 4 weeks later, it would still give me the wrong answer. Okay.
Yeah.
Very strange, but people are proactively data poisoning these models. Now, the last thing I'll just mention is just like spreadsheets evolved back in the early 80s, because, I was fortunate enough to know Dan Bricklin with VisiCalc, and we helped develop Lotus 123, and Excel is 40 years old at this point, and we helped develop Excel because I'm the guy that came up with the accounting format and pivot tables. All right. So at those times, what was happening in Michigan is these spreadsheet products were leapfrogging each other. One would get better and another would get better, and they were competing against each other. It's a good thing. And that's what's happening in AI right now. So here's the net. For most CPA firms, the safest subscription is to add Copilot 365, $30 a month to your Microsoft 365 subscription, because Microsoft will indemnify you and has done that since September of 23, that if there is an error, a copyright violation, those type of things, they will defend the firm. And my theory here is I'd rather have Microsoft's lawyers defending me than my own counsel defending me on an AI issue. So now what happens here is Microsoft's Copilot will help you process email, and will help you write, client responses and so forth. And many of the things that you're probably doing in ChatGPT can be done in Copilot. It's the same basic engine. My theory and practice says that for accounting purposes, Google's Gemini or ChatGPT can actually do better than Copilot on accounting related things, but they're not as safe. So that's kind of the compromise. Do you want to be safe with AI, or you want to just use AI? All right. And so that's where I go on that.
So follow-up question, because I don't put any personal identifiable information into ChatGPT. I'm asking just very rudimentary, basic, general questions just to see how it responds. You're telling me that if I get Copilot into my Word document, for example, that I'm writing to an actual client where I may be entering personal identifiable information, that's going to have the same power as ChatGPT, maybe not as good, maybe as good, but it will also protect the PII. There's no issues there at all, or?
That's the basic approach. Yes, sir. Now, there's a little bit of evidence that Microsoft's having some leakage between your instance of Microsoft 365 and mine, for example. But that's part of the reason I think they did the indemnification, number one. Number two, earlier in our conversation, remember that I said that the AI engines will use your IP address to identify you. So whether you like it or not, wherever you're using your ChatGPT, your home, your office, it is tracking you. And therefore, even if you put in something like financials, which I also recommend against, but I've seen a lot of consultants to profession recommend that you pump financials and financial information through ChatGPT. Well, guess what? You can reverse engineer that and figure out exactly where this financial came from. So, if you're at an industry business pumping in your financials to get them analyzed, well, we now have your private business financials as public information. And oh, by the way, they could be feeding the AI model. Even though the $30 version says they don't feed the AI model, the $20 version says they do, and the free one certainly says they will. So you've got this different level of protection, but inside the Microsoft world, not only do you protect the PII, but it also protects the information according to all the jurisdictions around the world. Any place where Microsoft is selling Microsoft 365. So it'd be safe in Germany or Italy, just like it's safe here in the United States.
Okay, interesting. And so talk to me a little bit about the cost to integrate, because, private equity is a big deal in the CPA industry. That's not a topic for today. I've got another guest coming on to talk about private equity. But one of the things they always scare the owners of CPA firms, they're niche. The amount of the cost of implementing AI AI technology into your firm is going to be tremendous. How do you plan on paying for that? And in my head, I'm kind of scratching my head, like, is it really going to be that much? Is it going to, are we talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars? Is that where it's heading? Or is that just kind of a scare tactic and that's completely wrong and it's actually not? Because you said $30 for a license for Copilot. It doesn't sound like it's a Herculean effort there. So talk to me.
Not a big deal. In fact, Mish, while you're asking me the question, I'm like trying to do the Aussie wave because there's wind blowing in from the wrong direction here, man. And in any case, no. Are there companies, are there firms spending a lot on AI development? Yes. Do almost all of us not have to do that? So let me say it positively. Almost nobody has to spend that type of money.
Right.
About the only thing you really have to do, Mishkin, is spend a little bit of time first getting your policies right. And again, I'm happy to provide sample policies that I consider valid. But then work on building what's known as a prompt generation. And I do it in a spreadsheet today because I haven't found a better way. But build some standards for your firm to do the prompts in a structured and more automated approach. Now, if you kind of watch what's going on with AI, there's lots of people trying to teach you how to work with the engines, and the more you work with them, the better you get. But if you'll spend the time with a few people saying, look, here's what we'd like to be able to do. Let's build some ways to do that. I have built prompts now that can do all sorts of things for me, and they save stunning amounts of time, and we get more consistency. And frankly, I've decided as I go into the next year, I'm going to build tax-centric, audit-centric, and client accounting services, or CAS-centric prompts that I can give away to firms, because I've been giving away my generic ones, and it is clear the productivity goes up when you use my methodologies. But, in this particular case, if we're really going to leverage AI into the coming year, and of course, I think BlackRock in the last week or so has said they think AI is going to make more money in all of their holdings in the coming year than it's ever made, even after all the run up with NVIDIA this year and so forth. So maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but I can tell you AI is here to stay, and AI is a really wonderful thing. But there are some safety concerns that I have with AI, unlike, let's say, Mark Cuban, who says we should have no restrictions on AI in any shape or fashion. I've watched him be interviewed on that topic multiple times. It's like, Mark, I respect almost everything you say, but I think you might not be right here. But of course, he's only just recently come out and say he's net negative on his Shark Tank investments. So,
oh no, that's one of my favorite shows. Oh, no.
Yeah, well, you have perceptions of what's going on, but this one, I would ask my accounting professionals to be a little bit more cautious, because you're protecting client information in a very vulnerable area with tax, and it won't end well if you're the source of a lot of the client compromises.
I see. Okay. One last question for AI, and then I want to move on to our last topic of the day, which is going to be blockchain and digital assets. So I get this a lot, where I will go into meetings with other CPA firms, and they'll be recording everything with Fireflies or some kind of AI, whatever it is. When we'll talk about clients, we'll talk about client situations.
Yep.
We'll produce a transcript. Mish was very friendly, or Mish was not very friendly. Mish smiled 13 times, or Mish made a joke at 2 minutes in, or whatever it is. Like it senses everything that's going on there, and it gives you a nice little beautiful summary. But you're talking, you are talking about people's information. Like, what do you feel about that? What do you feel about those kind of technologies should we be using? I mean, I'll tell you right now, I do a lot of discovery meetings. I handwrite. I'm very old school. If I could do it on a yellow pad and I had the time to retype it back in, beautiful, I would totally do it that way. I don't think you could ever get me to stop doing that because, I grew up in the 80s. That's what you did. It's been ingrained in kind of what I do. But I do see the flip side and the value of having something that just does the entire transcript for you, and then you can copy, paste, modify, make it look beautiful very quickly. What's your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so you just remember you could use the remarkable tablet to handwrite and get those things transcribed automatically, which would be an okay way to do it.
Okay.
When you think about Firefly, Otter, Fathom, all those different tools, including Microsoft Teams and Zoom, which can do the same thing for you,
Right.
they are working beautifully well. Some CPA firms, BDO as an example, have banned their use because of privacy issues.
Okay.
And when I sit on board of directors meetings, we're using them for board things, but I actually warned them, hey, you've gotten a full transcript here. When we go into executive session, you better bloody turn that off. And oh, by the way, it's completely discoverable for the record. So the answer is, this is a tough one because the convenience is stunning. The accuracy is beautiful, but the risk is real. So you just have to really ask yourself, am I willing to take the risk of having a full transcript? Now, Mishkin, I think you know me well enough. I've tried to never hurt anybody. I've always tried to be 100% accurate and honest, right? So I don't really have any concerns that what I say would be incorrect or illegal is probably a better way to think about it. But if you've ever been in courtrooms, you know how things can be gamed, and you don't get to actually speak the truth. And I don't mind you telling you, I've been a expert witness in trials before where I couldn't speak the truth, and it's like, really? You're not going to let me tell you what actually happened? They're not going to do that. That's the lawyer's job, is to make sure some types of the truth don't come out.
Sure.
So I frame it all like that for you to say, I'm nervous when those are being used because you can't control where that content goes. However, very specifically with Fathom, in the last 48 hours, I reviewed all the sub-processors and safety items of that product. Just like Teams, I consider it to be safe to use in terms of not sharing the data explicitly. But some of the others, there's clauses in their license agreement that says, yeah, we're just going to share this data because we can monetize it.
Okay, got it. So I think you kind of made, because I've not, I thought about it. I haven't really pushed that, tool, just because, again, my process is always write it down, put it back in. But I think you've kind of made my decision for me, at least temporarily. Maybe we talk again a year from now, and you tell me differently in a year from now. I don't know, but
I would just suggest that if you're going to do it, and you do it with Teams on Copilot, you actually have some safety there from a client.
Okay, so there's a middle ground. Okay,
right.
We do it with Teams, yeah.
So notice that's a place that you could play pretty safely, and we do encourage you to actually, use a lot more of the speaking, the audible approaches that are available to us today, because the transcriptions are, again, so good. So just be thoughtful about it, and in certain situations, just like I mentioned in the executive session, you may want to turn it off because you just don't want that around. And in fact, I sent a message to a client this morning that was very cryptic, because unless you knew what was happening, you wouldn't know what I was talking about, right? But I wanted to check on them because I knew what was going on, and I just wanted to see if they gotten done what I asked them to do.
I see. Okay. Well, look, let's move on to the last topic of the day. I don't want to run this too far. Let's talk about digital assets, and then we'll conclude with blockchain. Tell me right now about your thoughts on where the IRS is at with their efforts to provide guidance on taxation of digital assets. My opinion is that they're always light years behind. Like, once they put something out, they're like, oh, you're now 10 years behind instead of 12 years behind. And they try their best. They've got some stuff that came out of the IAJA. They've got the 1099 DA form coming out, which they've got a ton of comments on, and they've modified that and updated that as time has gone on. But Where's the IRS at? Are they behind the curve, on par, ahead of the curve? Where in your opinion, where are they at on all that?
Yeah. So first off, way behind the curve. Second thing that I'll just call out is I've had the good fortune of attending all of the AICPA's blockchain forums. They've had 5. I've been at every one. And, the discussion this year, again, was how far out of school the regulatory environment is. Also, I am relatively certain based on the, current transition that there's going to be no motivation to do regulation around this. So the guidance is going to get even further out, as I would say. And and it also doesn't hurt you to know that the dominant contributions to both sides of the presidential campaign were crypto donations.
Yes, I knew that. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured you would. And so, you just look at that and say, well, But in terms of being a practitioner trying to do the right thing on a tax return, this is going to continue to be a little bit of your own opinion and not a lot of guidance from the IRS. You can use some of the research tools from the bigs, the Thomson Reuters and Wolters Kluwer, because they've done interpretation for you, or the Bloombergs. They'll help a little bit. But again, it's opinion, and there's not enough case law to actually lay this out very clearly. So, and of course, with your legal degree, Mishkin, you kind of get that away. And we also have case law getting upset right now. So where we've had historic, those are being reinterpreted. So I have very little confidence in, our ability to accurately prepare returns related to digital assets, even though speaking of CCH conference, like you did earlier, last year's conference, I taught cryptocurrency and digital assets and how to account for it in tax.
So really? Okay.
So I've done a pretty in-depth look at it based on what the laws were at that point in time, and they've remained pretty much the same since then. So anyway, it's a tough nut.
Yes. What's funny to me though, and I sent you the link on this case. It's really weird because they're so far behind the curve. But then you have the Algren case, AHLGREN, where you have this massive guilty plea that just recently occurred. Tell me about that case. Are we missing something? Is maybe CI doing a really good job and IRS general not doing a great job, or is it just something that they're gonna, it's low hanging fruit. They're gonna come across these guys left, right, and center, and they're gonna, they're just going to publicize it to show that they're doing something about it.
Yeah, I think that's the way I interpret that particular case. Now, we have to remember that, Department of Justice has financial fraud prosecutors. And so they're chasing those things down. And post 9/11, we got more crossover between agencies. IRS got involved, Department of Justice, FBI. I mean, lots of agencies got interagency communication. So my interpretation of this one was that, this probably showed up as fraudulent transactions and then wound up getting reported into the IRS, right? So, it was clear that the transactions were occurring, but they weren't being reported. And my theory here on this case and probably many other Mishkins is the cryptocurrency and digital assets are almost universally underreported. I mean, as we do this session together today, Bitcoin's over 100,000 at this point, right? And, people are using those holding types, these digital asset types, because they're trying to hide or shield assets. On the other hand, you think about what I called irrational investments in non-fungible tokens, where we were buying a portion of the art and so forth. And, that over the last few months has been collapsing. So, this is, what do I want to use? Quicksand. This is not very stable ground to be walking on, but as tax professionals, our clients are walking there. So it's going to be real hard to give clear advice. And, there's always different opinion on tax law. Some is real clear cut, some not so much. Let's just pick interpretations on the Marcellus Shale in, Pennsylvania and New York. There's lots of different ways to interpret those laws. Right now, there's lots and lots of ways to interpret these digital currency, digital assets, blockchain, cryptocurrency assets. Yeah, it's a tough thing to do correctly. So I'm
Yeah.
not sure I addressed your question exactly correctly, but
No, you did great, and we're going to bring some folks on. They're going to talk a little bit more in depth about taxation of cryptocurrency, because I think you're absolutely correct. I think it's a big issue. I think there's a lot of the tax loss. I think when we look back on, it's going to be, just a crazy amount that is going to, people are going to shake their head at. I also think that for a lot of CPAs, you can't put your head in the sand. It's kind of like foreign financial asset reporting. Like, I know a lot of people, don't tell me about it. I don't want to know, because I don't want to have to deal with it on your tax return. But I think you have to ask the question. I think it's imperative that these CPA firms have questionnaires about it. I also think CPA firms, if you're not going to do it, it's fine if you don't want to do it, stay in your sandbox, but have a good firm that you can refer your client to if they have these issues. And we have a couple firms that we refer folks to, that if it's too heavy and too much crypto for us, that's not our sandbox. That's not what we do at the Wolf Group.
yeah.
We'll refer them over and be like, you go see this specialist, and they'll take care of you.
And, even though we're going to get crypto ledgers reported to us for quite a number of years, I've recommended platforms like Legible or Luca Tax, which do a pretty good job of tracking the cryptocurrencies.
Mm-hmm.
So they can really help you if you're not super familiar with it, because they stay on top of all those laws. But you're also right. If it's not your sandbox, you might have to get out. Unfortunately, you probably have a lot of clients that are dabbling in these digital assets or active in them,
Yes,
but not telling you, which is even tougher. And about all you can do is go back to your engagement letter and your questionnaire, and if they've said no, you've got a defensible position, but it's kind of not defensible. It's a really, really tough area there. But, if you have not used something like Legible or Luca Tax, Legible, I think, is the better of the two for practitioners, you definitely want to have that in your toolkit, and you'd be appalled how much it will report for you, and it'll actually prepare appropriate forms for you, which, is helpful, and it's not particularly expensive.
perfect. Love that. Okay, last thing I want to talk about, and this is where we kind of separate out crypto and digital assets from, I think, the big thing that's helpful here is blockchain. How's blockchain going to affect the tax industry? Give us a couple of minutes on blockchain, your thoughts on that. You've attended all these AICPA blockchain conferences. Is this just something for the auditors out there that, that's their bread and butter? It's going to solve their world, and the rest of us, it doesn't really affect? Or is that this is something more pronounced, pervasive, helpful, etc.?
Yeah. So Mishkin, I will just disclose, I'm a fan of blockchain for lots of reasons. Why?
Okay.
Because I would actually like 100% auditing as opposed to statistical auditing. And I can see a future where we can roll transactions up from source through blockchain. And what blockchain does for us is it keeps them from being tampered with or immutable. That's really the beauty here. So what happens here is you can start picturing things like smart contracts, where we can hand goods, let's just say a container of goods, from one shipper to another until they're delivered. But you got a chain all the way from source to final consumer. And therefore, you can actually understand the costs and the values and so forth. So to me, almost all accounting software products will have the ability to accommodate blockchains in them over time. We have some that already can do some of this today. Low-end products, even like QuickBooks, can do it. Mid-market products like NetSuite can do it. High-end products like SAP can do it. There are only a few commonly used blockchain products for these types of contracts, Ethereum being the most common right now. And I think what will happen is the vendors will accommodate 2 or 3, and they'll become the dominant blockchain competitors. But see, I'm pretty excited about it because, if I buy a product, and I'm going to be really dumb on this one, an espresso maker, Okay.
Okay.
I want to know the components of that espresso maker are actually legitimate. In other words, is the copper in there really sourced from a place that I could trust, or is it a contaminated copper? Because when I heat up that espresso, I don't want a bunch of, toxins in my system.
No.
I'm going to put enough in there with the caffeine and the
Right.
coffee. Okay. But, I don't want the bloody metal leaching out.
Sure.
And so many products really have in the food industry, in the FAA and the airplane industry and so forth, there are things that really need to be tracked. And you think about the number of food recalls that we have out there right now. I don't have to go off on a litany on that, but just think about the number of recalls for food. You can handle all that food transport in blockchain too. And wouldn't it be nice to know that this lettuce or this ice cream came from this source on these dates? And you don't have to do a lot of legwork to be able to look it up and try to recall. It'll reduce the effort for recall, as an example. And, there's a lot of false claims of organic food right now that's not really organic, or
Yes.
that's, I can go into all that stuff. But blockchain solves some of those problems too. So the promise on blockchain is as stunning as the promise in quantum. And that's why I wish I was about 20 or 30 years younger, because I want to be around for all that stuff. And I'm planning on it right now, by the way. It's not like I'm going to check out anytime soon, but I've always told people I want to live to be 102, and now I want to live to be a little older than that, because I want to see all this stuff.
Well, I'm a big believer in the longevity kind of trends that are happening right now, the NAD plus shots and being healthy and all that stuff. In fact, we're doing a 3-part series on physical and mental health as we gear up for tax season. I've got some professionals coming on to talk about that, but I think you'll get there, Randy. You've got a passion, a zeal for life. I love it. Also, when I do these podcasts, I always tell people, if you can walk away with 1 or 2 things that you can use in your everyday life, then I've accomplished something. That's my goal. I feel like today's podcast, I feel like someone could walk away with like 50 things that they could do to help them out. So that's so awesome. You are the man, Randy. And like I grew up with the wrestlers in the 80s. So as Ric Flair said, you're the man, and you got to beat the man if you want to be the man. Well, you're definitely the man. And I really appreciate everything that you said here today. Last final question. If some of my listeners that are CPAs and they've got their CPA firm and they want to, get in touch with you, they want a consultation, how do they get in touch with you? Obviously, you're going to give us all the show notes, all the good stuff, all the links, including the links to your firm and all that. But what does it look like to get on the books with Randy? How does that work?
Yeah, people tell me I shouldn't do it this way, by the way, but I've been doing it for 40 plus years this way. I've been around technology for 50, actually 60 plus years at this point. And my rule of thumb is, if you've taken a K2 course, I always will do 2 hours of consultation at no charge. And everybody says to me, you should be charging by the hour and you should charge me for this. That's not what I do. So if you reach out, I'll speak to you. I'm not looking for billable time. I will speak to you at no charge for 30 minutes, let's say. If we go a little longer, that's okay, because if there's an engageable event, I'll do that. If there's not, all I want to do is help you, because it helps me fulfill my personal mission, which is to help as many people use technology in the way that benefits them the most. And I figure if I'm helping you as a practitioner, you're helping clients, I can't get any better leverage than that. So this is real easy. Email is my name, Randy at K2E as in K2enterprises.com, or Randy J at NMGI as in Network Management Group Inc.com. I do check email and I respond to them typically in less than 24 hours. So if you send me a message and I didn't get back with you, it might mean I was speaking, but normally I will still respond within 24 hours when you reach out with me.
Randy is very true on that. Now, Randy speaks a lot more than I do, and I speak a lot too. But Randy speaks a lot, so he's here, there, and everywhere. But he's fantastic on the response. Randy, thank you so much for being on today's podcast. We hope to have you back real soon to give us another update on this space. And just once again, such valuable information. So thank you.
Mishkin, I appreciate that. There are so many tax topics we could talk about. It would stun you, or technology topics. So I look forward to it. Good day. I appreciate spending time with you and your listeners.
Okay, thank you.
You've been tuning in to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.